Home, faithfully delivering value and interpreting global great books. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today we're discussing the book called Psychological Abuse. Psychological abuse. The book refers to emotional abuse. Emotional abuse is extremely common, yet alarmingly difficult to detect. A survey by Guangdong Women's Federation found 29.2% of families experience varying degrees of emotional abuse. Another survey by China Law Society revealed 88% of conflicted couples use abusive tactics like verbal attacks and threats. Some describe emotional abuse as psychological murder. More terrifyingly, it often harms victims invisibly. Victims suffer severe psychological damage while remaining unaware of their abuse, trapped in destructive cycles. What about the abusers? Many perpetrators remain unaware of their abusive behavior while inflicting harm. This book by Dr. Marie-France Hirigoyen, French medical expert and psychoanalyst, first introduced the concept of psychological abuse in 1998. Remaining influential for 20 years, it's essential reading for understanding emotional abuse. What exactly is psychological abuse? How do we recognize it? What should we do when facing it? We'll explore these questions through 3 sections. First, understanding psychological abuse. How to identify emotional abuse. Second, who are the abusers and victims? Third, coping strategies. Let's begin with the first question. What constitutes psychological abuse and how to recognize it? Psychological abuse uses non-physical tactics like isolation, belittling, and emotional manipulation to harm others. Let's examine a real-life example of emotional abuse. The husband developed feelings for a young assistant and gradually distanced himself from his wife, even resorting to subtle psychological abuse. The first sign of psychological abuse was the husband's perpetual bad mood. He would come home at night, immerse himself in his own activities, ignore his wife's greetings, and communicate through casually cruel remarks rather than direct confrontation. Like when he started calling his wife fat old woman, which obviously hurt her deeply. When she tried expressing her pain, he would stonewall her with complete emotional detachment. Eventually, the wife snapped, prompting his accusations. "You're just a shrew who can't stop yelling." This led to escalating conflicts where the wife began having emotional outbursts. The husband weaponized these reactions, labeling her as fundamentally flawed and violent. Their mutual destruction became clear, her pain visible, his hidden in daily neglect. The wife sought reconciliation through communication. The husband retreated further. Feeling trapped and unheard, the wife ultimately chose separation and divorce. But the story didn't end there. The husband erupted when faced with separation. "You're kicking me out, you heartless monster!" The wife internalized this rage, blaming herself for his pain over losing family access. Meanwhile, the husband spun victim narratives to friends and family. He painted her as the villain, who cruelly abandoned him. Though wanting to defend herself, she struggled between privacy and preserving his dignity. She attempted private appeals to stop his false narratives, but since the husband persistently refused direct communication, all her efforts proved futile. Ultimately, the desperate wife resorted to legal action against her husband. This case demonstrates multiple psychological abuse tactics, like dehumanizing remarks, labeling her as defective, violent, a shrew, and outright crazy. The husband distorted reality by framing her reasonable separation request as heartless eviction. He weaponized false narratives about being made homeless. Mockery manifested through cruel nicknames like fat old hag, followed by emotional stonewalling when confronted. These represent common domestic psychological abuse methods. The most insidious abuse permeating this process was systematic communication refusal. In fact, communication blockade is the foundation of psychological abuse. Most abuse tactics rely on this communication vacuum to thrive. Without clear communication, speculation and misinterpretation enable other abusive behaviors. What does this mean exactly? Consider workplace scenarios where we might experience mockery, like a boss yelling, "You're useless, can't do anything right." Does this automatically constitute psychological abuse? Not necessarily. If the boss later provides constructive feedback or adjusts behavior when confronted, it's not abuse. Genuine communication bridges understanding because open dialogue clarifies misunderstandings and eliminates toxic speculation. Through previous examples, we've understood psychological abuse's definition and its manifestations in marriages. But psychological abuse isn't limited to families. It permeates another major life arena, the workplace, where communication blockade remains the primary abusive tactic. 6 common workplace abuse methods build on this foundation. 1. Confidence erosion. Indirect attacks through nonverbal cues, like exasperated sighs, contemptuous looks, backhanded jokes. "You're such a useless idiot," said playfully. 2. Reputation sabotage. Planting doubts through insinuation. Example: when new grad declines extra tasks, colleagues mutter, "Top students are too delicate for real work." 3. Isolation. Cutting off alliance opportunities. Through exclusion from cliques, shared activities, or info become pressure tools. 4. Bullying via demeaning tasks or unreachable goals, like making CS graduate babysit printers indefinitely. Forcing failures to enable criticism, setting impossible targets, then attacking self-worth, like assigning impossible tasks to new employees for eventual humiliation. 6. Sexual harassment. Inappropriate comments or unwanted physical contact constitute harassment. Displaying explicit materials in workplaces also qualifies as harassment. Now we recognize domestic and workplace psychological abuse patterns. These abuse methods transcend specific environments. The tactics apply across marital, professional, and other contexts. Now, let's examine abuse escalation and consequences. Abuse progresses insidiously. Victims gradually lose self-confidence. The author identifies 2 phases: personality erosion and open aggression. Personality erosion phase uses communication denial and gaslighting. How does this manipulation work? Like the husband's emotional neglect in our case study. The wife's self-doubt grows. Did I do something wrong? Why is he treating me this way? She walks on eggshells to avoid provoking him. Yet nothing pleases him. She becomes anxious and isolated. This demonstrates indirect communication-based manipulation. Classic personality erosion phase behavior. Victims remain unaware of abuse during this phase. They internalize blame. "It must be my fault," until realization dawns. "This isn't my responsibility. Why should I endure this abuse?" The victim begins resisting. When attempting to change the abusive dynamic, victims often face intensified attacks from perpetrators. The abuser's previous tactics become ineffective, replaced by more overt abusive methods. This marks the second phase of psychological abuse. In our case study, after failed communication attempts, the wife pursued separation or divorce. The husband's abuse became overt, surface-level hatred escalating to personality destruction. Why would abusers hate their victims? Subconsciously, the wife's resistance shattered the abuser's narcissistic fantasy. We'll analyze abuser or victim dynamics in part 2. Consciously, abusers rationalize hatred by blaming victims for oppression. Day, post-separation, the husband played victim to relatives while justifying abuse as deserved. Honored and unheard, the wife resorted to extreme emotional outbursts as last recourse. Outsiders perceived her reactions as irrational violence. Public sympathy shifted to the husband after her breakdowns, enabling his smear campaign. We've seen how abuse progresses through personality erosion to open aggression phases. Now let's examine psychological abuse consequences. Effects are categorized as short-term and long-term based on duration. Short-term effects include withdrawal, confusion, doubt, and fear. Example: in film Caught in the Web, the protagonist faced cyber abuse after refusing bus seat, like being subjected to baseless accusations and insults, with personal dignity trampled and privacy violated. He began withdrawing socially, experiencing sleep disturbances and existential self-doubt. Short-term effects manifest physically or mentally. Chronic abuse leads to trauma and decompensation. Psychological trauma exhibits PTSD-like symptoms, flashbacks of abuse incidents, and avoidance behaviors, like refusing to pass former workplace buildings. Decompensation occurs when substitute coping mechanisms fail. Psychological compensation replaces unmet needs with fantasies, like children convincing themselves abusive parents mean well, creating mental narratives to endure emotional deprivation. When rationalizations collapse under worsening abuse, decompensation brings psychological collapse, depression, anhedonia, suicidal ideation. Physical manifestations include ulcers and cardiovascular issues. These are the devastating long-term impacts. Let's recap key points. Psychological abuse involves communication sabotage and character assassination, manifesting through isolation, mockery, gaslighting tactics. We've covered the two phases of psychological abuse: personality erosion and open aggression. Finally, we discussed both short-term and long-term consequences of emotional abuse. With this knowledge, we can better identify potential abuse in daily interactions. You might wonder, what about friends teasing remarks that sound abusive? Like calling someone fatty or airheaded angel, does that count as abuse? Key differentiators are tone and intent. Playful teasing lacks manipulative purpose. These jokes don't involve personality erosion or open aggression patterns. Crucially, recipients don't develop fear or trauma from such banter. Thus, friendly teasing shouldn't be conflated with actual psychological abuse. Now let's examine part 2. Understanding abusers and victims. Who becomes the abuser? Who becomes the victim? First, what creates an abuser? Under certain circumstances, anyone could exhibit abusive behavior. Online anonymity often enables cyberbullying incidents, like when netizens attacked celebrities' friends after a star's death, criticized for both mourning and not mourning sufficiently. Damned if they do, damned if they don't. This mob mentality constitutes psychological abuse. Psychological research shows anyone might abuse under stress. Dark thoughts about others don't necessarily indicate pathology. It's human nature to occasionally manipulate situations for gain. The author suggests the key difference between ordinary people and abusers lies in the transient nature of our harmful behaviors and remorse. Some we feel guilt afterward, while abusers destroy others without remorse. And the book focuses on malignant narcissists, those prone to abuse, characterized by grandiosity and hypersensitivity to criticism. Why do narcissists become abusers? Psychoanalysis suggests overindulged narcissists developed subconscious omnipotence fantasies from childhood. They subconsciously perceive others as extensions of their control. From developmental perspective, controlled elements become incorporated into self-identity. This constructed self defines their psychological existence. Thus, narcissists perceive the world as mere extensions of their ego, effectively believing I am the world, unable to recognize separate individuals. This reveals the first reason narcissists abuse. Their fragmented self-identity obliterates boundaries between self and others. Without recognizing others' autonomy, abuse becomes self-service rather than interpersonal harm. Second reason, narcissists appoint themselves moral arbiters of reality. Conflicts automatically become others' faults, justifying righteous abuse. In narcissistic logic, infallibility is non-negotiable. This creates inescapable helplessness. Victims cannot counter baseless accusations. Not all narcissists abuse. Malignant types specifically degrade others to self-elevate. Healthy narcissism drives achievement within social norms, distinct from abusive patterns. For clarity, narcissists in our discussion specifically refer to malignant narcissists unless stated otherwise. Now let's examine who becomes victims. Abusers rarely consciously select victims. They see them as interchangeable objects. Victims become targets simply by being present when abuse triggers activate. Though victims can't prevent abuse, responses vary. Some resist openly, while others internalize blame. 3. Personality types get trapped in abuse cycles. Melancholic personalities, self-blaming conscientious sufferers. They prioritize others' needs while rejecting help. Ideal abuser targets. 2. Oversharers. And 3. Naive optimists complete the triad. Example: social media enthusiasts sharing achievements risk triggering abusers' envy. Naive victims keep rationalizing abuse. If I explain, they'll understand. This earnestness backfires, increasing vulnerability. How do abusive dynamics form? While situational factors, anonymity or authority, enable abuse, true abusers differ through consistent pattern maintenance. Once environmental conditions change, abusive behaviors typically cease. Narcissists maintain abusive dynamics, most classically between narcissistic abusers and melancholic victims. Narcissists exhibit arrogance and blame shifting. Melancholics drown in guilt, finding purpose only through servitude. These relationships thrive on the victim's endless self-sacrifice. Yet no effort can satisfy the narcissist's bottomless demands. Victims spiral into exhaustion, internalizing blame. I deserve this abuse. Notably, narcissistic abusers often create melancholic victims, commonly seen in parent-child relationships. Example: a narcissistic father demands perfection, verbally abusing his child for any shortcomings. Children internalize these impossible standards over time. Perpetual failure breeds deepening self-loathing and desperate compliance, an endless cycle eroding self-worth into clinical depression. Thus, we see how narcissistic parents manufacture melancholic offspring. To recap part 2, malignant narcissists become abusers. Melancholics, oversharers, naive optimists become prime victims. Now addressing the crucial question: how to counter psychological abuse. Let me walk you through this using insights from the book and personal experiences. Here's a 3-step approach. First, adjust your response patterns. Recognizing the abuse pattern is crucial, regardless of context. Victims often internalize blame during abuse. This must stop. Thoughts like, did I fail or am I inadequate, must be rejected. Firmly attribute responsibility to the abuser through cognitive restructuring. Second, take concrete action after mental reframing. Key action: expose the abuse to witnesses and seek support. How to publicize the crisis. The author suggests domestic abuse victims should minimize direct contact with abusers. When contact's unavoidable, ensure third-party presence. For phone harassment, change numbers or record conversations. Workplace abuse victims should contact HR departments first. Demand clear instructions to prevent ambiguous demands exploitation. If refused, submit written requests to document evidence. Final recourse: legal action. Law serves as crucial protection against psychological abuse. China's anti-domestic violence law provides legal safeguards. Workplace abuse legislation continues developing. Third, psychological resistance through support systems. A single ally's trust can rebuild shattered confidence. Seek trusted friends or family or workplace support networks. When immediate circles fail, professional therapy becomes vital. Therapy helps victims recognize behavioral patterns and heal psychological trauma. China's Tier 1 or 2 cities have established comprehensive mental health services. Free counseling hotlines are available where therapy access is limited. We're concluding our discussion on psychological abuse. Let's recap key takeaways. 1. Psychological abuse is emotional violence, manifesting through communication sabotage and character assassination, progressing through personality erosion to open aggression phases. Victims develop withdrawal symptoms. Chronic cases face trauma or decompensation. 2. Malignant narcissists become abusers. Melancholics become victims. Abusive parents often create psychologically damaged offspring. 3. 3-step defense: awareness, action, psychological armor. This concludes our analysis of psychological abuse. Study notes below. See you tomorrow.